As you know, we're working closely, or will, Clinton, in fact, today, to see about other ways that we can use Alaska Housing Finance Corporation on an interim basis to ensure that the money is getting out to the people at the low to middle income ranges through the banking system.
You would deny then the Democrats' charge that the administration plans to allow AHFC to die?
The question of whether AHFC lives or dies is chiefly a question of, number one, whether the federal government allows the subsidy of tax-exempt bonds to continue for these purposes. And if the federal government does not allow it to continue, it depends further on the legislative and political decision as to whether the state is going to pick up and make up that difference.
As for Meekin's charge that state projects are far behind promised schedules, Williams says in some cases that's true. He says the administration tried to speed up a number of projects, but he says several, many in the Anchorage area where Meekin's lives, ran into problems and couldn't be expedited. Federal authorities have said since last year that people caught hunting in violation of national monument rules would be prosecuted. They seem ready to prove that next week, as we hear from Jeff Berliner.
Dr. Leonard Ferrucci is slated to appear before a federal magistrate Tuesday on charges connected to an alleged illegal hunting trip in one of the federal areas proclaimed as a national monument by President Carter. Arrested last month for hunting Dall sheep in the protected Wrangell Mountains, 2 charges have now been filed against the Anchorage gynecologist: possession of illegal game and wanton waste. The wanton waste is actually a state violation, but because it occurred on federal land, the case will be pressed in federal court. The charge amounts to a claim that the hunter left his dead game behind. Under the law, it is illegal to kill game and discard the food, even if it is killed legally. But in addition to the wanton waste charge, the government says the sheep was not killed legally, and Ferrucci, caught with the animal's horns, must defend himself on the charge of possessing illegal game. Although Dr. Ferrucci could have been charged with illegal hunting, the illegal possession is reportedly easier to prosecute and tougher to defend. Ferrucci will enter a plea in the case, probably not guilty, in his upcoming court appearance. Ferrucci is the first hunter to face prosecution for illegal acts within the newly created national monuments designed, in part, to protect wildlife from sports hunters. But Ferrucci may attempt to defend himself by claiming his act was not illegal because the national monuments themselves are illegal. But that is already before the courts in a much larger civil suit now pending. This is Jeff Berliner.
That Kenai Peninsula Borough land sale set for tomorrow won't happen, at least not tomorrow. Randy Summers says from Homer that Anchorage Superior Court Judge Ralph Moody has granted a preliminary injunction to halt the sale. The injunction was asked for by Kenai Borough Assemblyman Harry Martin, whose lawsuit against the sale raises several constitutional questions. A familiar sight in many southeast Alaskan communities, the vessel Island Trader won't be around much longer. Mark Byford tells us the boat's owner, Bob Young, blames the demise of the Island Trader on progress.
The Island Trader is a 90-foot, 99.7 gross ton freight and produce hauler, which operates within southeast Alaska. Young says the main reason for the shutdown is the fact that more roads and ferries are connecting spots which previously had no other way to ship their goods. Our volume has gone down a great deal, says Young, not so much in produce, but in deck loads. The boat makes about 27 stops in its circuit from Ketchikan to Wrangell, the northernmost stop on its route. It makes 2 trips a week, one to Thorn Bay and one from Ketchikan to Wrangell, stopping at all the logging camps in between. It takes 3 days to make the circuit, and the boat is on the move constantly. Young bought the business in 1970 and has been running to Wrangell for the better part of this decade. The boat also serves most of Prince of Wales Island, and with all the ports of call, it stops about every 3 hours. Young did say today that he's enjoyed serving Wrangell, with the exception of what he called a lack of cooperation by the Port Commission to help him find another place to dock. The boat now ties up at McCormick's dock in Wrangell, and Young says it's too hard to try and maneuver it in and out of the area. He says he has no immediate plans for his business. However, he did say that it's been up for sale for the past 3 years on the open market, but there's been no takers. When asked what would happen to all the customers he serves, Young said, "Somebody will fill up the slack. They always do." The Island Trader's last trip will be November 29th. For Alaska News Nightly, I'm Mark Byford in Wrangell.
Alaskan miners may be among the state's more rugged individualists, Karen McPherson reports the prospectors have to put up with paperwork just like the rest of us.
It's time for miners to put down their picks and pick up their pens. October 21st is the deadline for filing mining applications for claims located before October 21st, 1976. Claims located after the October 21st, 1976 date are not restricted by the current filing deadline. Regulations in effect after that date require miners to file with the Bureau of Land Management within 90 days after staking the claim, or the claim will be considered abandoned. When registering, miners must bring a $5 registration fee for each claim, a description of the location, and proof of ownership. In addition, proof of $100 in labor per claim is required annually. Bowman Hinckley, Land Records Officer at the Fairbanks office, says that most miners use a friend's labor to meet that requirement or count their own time. He says the BLM is pretty easy on that. Although a Fairbanks Daily News miner report stated that miners who worked unfiled claims could be charged with trespass, Hinckley says that trying to enforce that would be, quote, paper tigerism. The task of patrolling the millions of claims, according to Hinckley, would be impossible. The Fairbanks office is swamped with late filers. Why did Hinckley think so many people had put off the filing to the last minute? Quote, well, it's just human nature for people to be like that, he said. And you just wouldn't believe some of the people were getting in here. Karen McPherson in Fairbanks.
And this is APRN, the Alaska Public Radio Network. Take back the night will be the message this evening as women's groups throughout Alaska gather to hold parades and demonstrations against rape, a crime which has increased in recent years in our state. Rape and the traumatic effects it leaves with its victims are the subject of this story, produced at public station KTOO in Juneau.
Knock on my door, and this guy lived upstairs from me. I'd seen him, I didn't know him. And he opened the door, and we'd been having a really bad garbage problem, so he just started talking about what we could do to clean it up, which I thought, you know. And then he asked me if he could come in, and I said no. Well, then he pushed his way in and hit me. Rape is not a crime of sexuality. Rape is a crime of violence and aggression. Every rape victim experiences a profound sense of fear for her life. The following interviews include statements by women who were raped in southeast Alaska. He had a knife. When he threatened me with it, I didn't see it. He just kept saying if I scream, and I never did scream, that he would use this, and he kept pulling something out of his back pocket, so I never screamed. Towards the end, I just wanted him out of there. And to get him out of there, I just felt to be friendly, and he had invited me to some party upstairs or something, you know, like this whole thing was just, you know, a friendly affair. So then once he got out of there, it was probably after midnight, I guess, and I must have been in shock or something because I sat there on my couch, and the next thing I knew, it was daylight. And the thing I remembered the most, it was in my mind, he had broken my glasses, and I kept thinking I can't go to work because my glasses are broken. So I called in to work, which then I found out this good friend of mine knew something was wrong because the only thing I said was, I'm not coming into work because my glasses are broken. The trauma of sexual assault has been formally recognized by many professionals. Myths about rape and the lack of knowledge of its impact force the victim to feel deserted and intimidated by the procedures established to protect her. 7 years ago, a woman reporting a rape in Juneau received little support. My friend, well, she wasn't even allowed to come in the hospital room with me. And then I was alone at the police station. There was, she wasn't allowed to come in with me at all. They asked me, first they had me in a room with the detective that had taken me to the hospital with this friend of mine. And then they asked me to go in to another room with a police officer and the assailant. He wanted to talk to me. He said that he wanted to make sure that I knew basically what I was doing because this person was on parole. and he could lose his parole.
I think the sensitivity has changed on law enforcement's part, basically probably due to the increased amount of training that individuals are receiving in rape investigations.
Investigator John Glass with the Juneau Division of State Troopers.
Some of your Supreme Court decisions on investigations, period, including a confrontation by the victim with the defendant suspect. Things like this have definitely changed the attitude of law enforcement towards rape victims. Times have changed it too. Call it women's liberation if you wish.
Even if an arrest is made, the victim still experiences little assurance of safety. The criminal justice process can take many months, and during that time a woman continues to be under stress and anxiety. I was real fearful. I was scared to death. During the time when he was arrested, he was put on his own recognizance. I saw him on the street one time, and I was just really terrified. In addition to her own acute sense of fear and shock, the victim of sexual assault is further alienated by social attitudes which isolate and condemn her. Attitudes carried into the courtroom by the members of a jury.
Some of the younger women, 12, 13, 14, were instructed by their parents not to talk to me. And it was a thing that I wasn't used to. I didn't know what was going on because these people hadn't talked to me. And eventually one of them finally told me that her mother had told her not to talk to me. And as if I was scarred or as if I had asked for it. And it felt like I was the one being punished. But yet I'd already been punished. And why be punished again?
District Attorney in Juneau, Jim Hanley.
It would be nice if the day would come when sexual assault victims were treated like any other assault victim, but the main difference is a sexual assault victim is being called a liar right at the beginning. Most assault victims are not called a liar. There may be other defenses offered, but anytime a defendant in a sexual assault case pleads not guilty, he is in essence usually saying that the victim is either mistaken, it was somebody else, or else she's lying. And that, I think, is the primary difference at the very start of the case. In addition, there is no way to deny that sexual assault is a sensitive topic, and that despite efforts to treat it like any other assault, when the victim is required to discuss intimate sex, it will always be a difficult case.
A woman reporting a rape is faced with law enforcement, medical, and legal procedures, an extended period of time, sometimes months before the trial, if an arrest is made, her own emotional reaction as well as the response of a community in which she lives, her relationship to family, friends, trying to maintain a job, in some cases coping with children, and continually reliving the fear.
I remember when they finally said it was hung jury, and I was inside a building and watched outside the building and saw the jurors go towards the courthouse and the defendant go towards the courthouse. And I was just thinking, if I see the jury come back, then he must have been guilty. And if the defendant came back by himself, then he must have been innocent. So they must have decided that he was innocent and he could go free. So I was just sitting there for about an hour, staring out the window to see him go by. And a little while later, he walked by himself. And that was about the hardest thing to take of the whole thing. After the initial happening, after the whole thing, after all that, everything, all the work in the courtroom, and all the work with the troopers, and just to see him walk by himself that was too much. And that's when I cried the hardest out of the whole thing.
We can use the criminal justice system as a way to confront the issue of rape and bring it out into the open. The failure of this system to bring about more convictions reflects the attitudes of a society which condones violence against women.
I'm still having nightmares, and the feelings and emotions are intensified, and a knock on the door still improperly always will cause bad reaction. But I knew afraid of everything. You can't live that the rest of your life. Every new day is a new day.
That story on rape and its victims was produced as part of a series on violence against women by Janet Lubianski, Barbara Bondi, Mary Ellen Cuthbertson, Margot Melnikoff, and Lori Roberts at public station KTOO in Juneau. This is APRN, the Alaska Public Radio Network. Much of Alaska's history has been lost, handed down orally from generation to generation, with fewer and fewer people hearing and learning about their past. But Karen McPherson reports that a Fairbanks woman is working to transcribe and publish many of the stories told by an Athabascan chief, who was also her uncle.
In the summer of 1976, Chief Henry died. He had spent his life on the Koyukon River living in the old way. He was well known for his stories, his philosophy, his songs, and his snowshoe making. 2 years before he died, some of his stories were recorded by the Alaska Native Oral Literature Project. Eliza Jones of the Alaska Native Language Center at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks has recently been transcribing and translating those tapes of stories of times past as told by her uncle. Chief Henry was Eliza's mother's cousin, and his wife Bessie is her father's older sister. Although originally chief at the village of Allakaket, Chief Henry was referred to as chief for the rest of his life. The January following the summer of his death, a memorial potlatch was held for him in Huslia, one of the biggest potlatches in memory. The stories in Eliza's book are of old times recalled by her uncle, who was born in 1883. Eliza herself grew up hearing those stories.
When I was a child, I was very small then, and there was, I had a lot of uncles and aunties from my mom's side and my dad's side, and they were the oldest couple of all my uncles and aunties, so they were always my favorite uncle and aunties because they lived so differently from everybody else, everybody else liked to, use kickabout and, do things the easy way, and they used to go to visit them in fish camp, and they had this smokehouse with birch bark covered, and they had a dirt over it, and they'd sit down at the smokehouse and tell stories, and I used to just love that.
There's a Koyukon term for the kind of stories in the book.
Mm-hmm. There are kadonsibni, and kadonsibni are stories about when animals were people, and those are called kadonsibni. And those are only stories that are only told a certain time of the year, like, you tell it in maybe starting September to about the end of December. But these stories that I'm working on are called Yudon Hokanaga, which is sort of like, I guess you'd call it history, which is just words about long time ago, what life was like long time ago.
And could they be told at any time of year?
And they could be told anytime. Anytime people get together, they start telling stories. You remember what this was like, and or they tell other stories of events that they'd heard about.
Could you tell us one of those stories?
Yeah. Du oda kun salno. It has to you. Dinat ok el kikt ya ok has honor. Another time, we went hunting on a nomadic hunt. At that time, as we moved, all that we had to live on was what others gave us. Their grandfather, now deceased, would try to get spruce hens, but always it was with just one that he met them at the camp. So, let me try getting the spruce hens too, I said to him. And okay, he said. So I went, to my surprise, so I went to where there was a stand of spruce trees. It was a place where there were lots of spruce hens. And there I shot and shot at the spruce hens. And then really it was too much. So with my belt I tied the nicks together and carried the whole bundle but it was hopeless. And then I remembered that in the summertime, my late uncles, when they hunt, they'd skewer the ducks through the wing. So then with what? Maybe I had an old knife or a piece of tin. With that, I cut a stick and peeled it and skewered the wings with it. Blood was that. So either it's an auto-dalski.
Do you think that people will be getting real information from these stories and learning some of the old ways?
Oh, I think so. They just have to. I mean, there's just so much information in here that you can't get by just asking people. And as I'm translating and writing these stories, I also put a footnotes in them to give a background information about some of the things that he's talking about.
The footnotes come from your own understanding of what he's saying?
No, my own. The footnotes come from my own interpretation of the way I understand things, and maybe other people would interpret some other things from other places. But just have to live with what I got there.
Well, it's the kind of thing that only someone who's been involved with the people, I would think, like with your uncle, could really do.
Like some of the things he talked about, there was one part where he talked about bear hunting, and he was talking about when he went trapping, and he said something about even though. So I decided to look around in the woods that day. He said, and the way he said it was, I spent the whole day in what looked like a really good ground, good country. But I didn't see anything. Even though later on in years, I was to have good luck in finding, what kind of place. And that was the whole. That was the whole thing.
That's the message.
That's the message. I mean, that was all that he said in there. And so I footnoted it that you're not supposed to mention bear or anything like that. So
that's what happened.
So that's what happened, yeah. And so by saying, what kind of place he meant, a bear den, what kind of sign, and so there's a lot of that kind of thing in here. And also, he's a lot of things he's talking about, he's taken for granted that other people, are supposed to know, so.
Do you think there's a real difference when you take something that's oral, like storytelling, and write it down?
Yeah, there is. By writing it down, you lose some of the things, I think, because that's the reason this book is written this way, because the first time that I wrote it, I just wrote it down sentence by sentence and wrote a whole book. But then the way this one is written now, see, each time he paused, it's one line. So that if you read it like that, it brings out, it's sort of a poetry style, more than
prose.
And prose. And the English is sort of compromised between a literal translation and a really good English. So the way it's told in Koyukon is just the opposite from English. The most important event, the most important thing about what you're saying, you say it last.
How do you feel about doing this project? How does it make you feel?
Well, I'm really excited about it. It's one of my favorite projects, and I really enjoy doing this kind of things, working on stories and things that other people have told.
Are you a storyteller yourself?
Well, not a very good one.
Eliza Jones, who's working on a book of stories told by a good storyteller, her uncle, Chief Henry. I'm Karen McPherson in Fairbanks.
That's our program for tonight. Alaska News Nightly is produced in Anchorage by Marcia Alvar and Don Byron. Contributing tonight were Jeff Berliner in Anchorage, Mark Byford in Wrangell, Karen McPherson in Fairbanks, and in Juneau, Janet Lemiansky, Barbara Bondi, Mary Ellen Cuthbert.